are as many stories in recovered voices as there are people. People very often ask, is this all about music written in the concentration camps? The answer is no. A tiny fraction of the music we're talking about was actually written in concentration camps. Maybe 2%, maybe 1%. There are extraordinary stories. Victor Ullmann, Erwin Schulhoff, Hans Krage, Pavel Haas, Gideon Klein. Even they, who wrote in concentration camps, had been writing before they were interned. The majority of this music is written for the same reason everything else was written. It was an artist applying his or her talent or genius to create beautiful music. And that's what we're dedicated to. The performing of these pieces, because if the pieces are not performed in a certain way, they don't exist. A piece of music must be heard. It must have an audience in order to be fully experienced. And so it's not enough that it exists on paper. It's not enough that there's a score, that there are parts. It has to be played. And so what I am dedicating myself to is provoking, if you will, interest, attention, so that the music gets played and heard, because I am convinced that a great deal of it is of first-rate artistic quality and should be performed as it was meant to, right alongside of composers who had not suffered any suppression by the part of the Nazi regime.
On behalf of Ziering-Conlon, I welcome you all to this, the 15th of 16 class sessions this semester of Ziering-Conlon's Recovered Voices course here at the Colburn School.
I had heard quite a bit of my father's music, the Schoenberg music, because that was performed a lot. But my other grandfather, Eric Zeisel, his music was not performed a lot as I was a kid growing up, and I unfortunately never met him. He died a few years before I was born. And what he left behind was his music. So my grandmother had all of these old tapes and old records, like this one over here, of his music, and I became very interested and I started listening. And it's beautiful, it's wonderful music. It's easy to like, in many ways much easier to approach than the Schoenberg music. And so I, along with my mother and my grandmother, began telling people about it. Whenever I met anybody who was a performer or in the music world, I would mention, I have this other grandfather and you might want to listen. And usually they wouldn't really think much of it because most people knew my father's father and no one had heard of my mother's father. But oftentimes they would follow my advice and listen, and then they would be this sort of shock. How come I don't know about him? How come I've never heard of this other composer? His music is wonderful. And so I realized after going through that a few times that it really did speak to people. And it really was very worthwhile music that had been forgotten. So then the question is, why was it forgotten, and how do you do something about it?
Gefällig
Composers like Zemlinsky, like Ullmann, like Schulhoff, who incorporated what was going on around them while moving their own traditions forward, were not so much revolutionaries as they were evolutionaries. They were making their strides incrementally, moving music forward in the way that they felt was best, that they were more comfortable in. And so now, as we revisit that body of music, we can revisit it knowing that, for those people who don't know the music, we can revisit it knowing that this is music that is accessible. For the most part, it is warm and filled with melody, and the operas are filled with great stories and great music. The chamber music is in a tradition that everyone enjoys. These are great works of art which were set aside not because they weren't worthy of performances and worthy of entering the repertoire. They were set aside because they were caught in the debris and the tragedy of the years in Europe from the 1930s through the mid-1940s.
If people, prior to listening, are excited about the subject and have an anticipation, they listen in a different way. They bring a whole different process, so that their listening is more intense, they grasp more, they're more excited. And then the piece ends, but with what we call sort of really works of musical art, the experience doesn't end. It's assumed that the experience with the music is going to lead to all different kinds of contemplation. Some of it can be purely musical contemplation. Some of it's historical contemplation. Some of it's trying to figure out ideas that you've already had and you're searching for answers. So this is a really kind of exciting thing that music does. And this music, because people have such a stake in the circumstances, they have such a stake in what happened in the past, they listen to it in a different way. So on the one hand, this notion I had that, Holocaust music, it's too reductive, people want to listen to it. And, well, in a way that was wrong, because people care, they bring a fuller attention to it than they might otherwise. So this music has a kind of ideal audience. And it works both ways, because this music has a kind of ideal audience, and because education is such an important part of the way this music is going to come to life. Then you need things like an infrastructure. You need conductors who are going to perform it. You need research centers where people can come study. You need a population who's willing to sort of, whether on blogs or all kinds of chat rooms, sort of carry this, because music lives when it's played, but it also lives when it's discussed, when it means something to people and when people care about it. And this repertoire, again, because of the quality of the music and the fraught circumstances in which it was written, has a dramatic character that I think can sustain, really decades of interest in performance, of new approaches that will really bring something very special to the world of classical music.
As a young boy growing up, I always questioned people of my parents' generation. What did you do as the Nazis were gaining power, and what did you do to try to pressure our government to do something about it, and especially during World War II. And so I have dedicated my life as an individual to never repeating those mistakes again, never to accept persecution, accept genocide as part of the cost of doing human business in this planet. James's project of Recovered Voices is the quintessential way and maybe a unique way to retroactively fight that practice which rendered these composers nameless and performanceless for so many decades. It's a very exciting project, and in the Jewish tradition, the greatest gift you can give is to somebody who doesn't know that you've given them the gift, when you're anonymous in your gift giving. That way, the rabbis say you can never expect anything in return from those individuals. So it's the ultimate righteous gift to a human being when they don't know who the giver is. Well, this is the ultimate gift that James is giving to those people who are no longer with us. They can never repay him in any way. The remuneration he gets is the satisfaction that all of us should get, to be able to basically say to Adolf Hitler and all of his henchmen, you lose, we're still here, the voices are still here, the operas are still being performed, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
The fact that almost 70 years after the end of the war, that so many of these pieces still have never been recognized globally for their worth is a commentary on how easy it is to destroy and how difficult it is to create.
There's a question that hovers over the concert constantly, and that is this music being played because of what happened to the composers, as opposed to the quality of the music? That question disappears when this music is in a program with a work by Beethoven or a work by Bartók. And so, again, part of the challenge that we face is convincing people to, young musicians in particular, to listen to this music, to take it into their ears, into their fingers, and ultimately into their hearts, and incorporate it into their performing lives.
I hope that there is a way that all this music that is being uncovered, I'm sure there's music being rediscovered every day somewhere in the world, has a place to live, and educators and students can come and learn about the music, and music students who want to conduct the music can learn how to conduct this music. They can learn the history of the time, why this music was suppressed, what was going on at the time. I don't think children today or young people learn about what happened in the 40s, in 39 in Germany and in Europe. So this is a way of bringing them some knowledge of history when you incorporate music into it.
I dream about a center where we can radiate outwards, giving information and inspiration to many about these composers and their compositions. I would like that to radiate out to young musicians. They are the future. And my experience with young musicians playing this music has been extremely positive in that they are open to it and are able to take this in like a sponge. I believe in Recovered Voices that we have to open our eyes and our ears to what has been there all along and to include it as a part of the legacy of what we have inherited in classical music.